Over the last year or so, I've been accruing quite a stash of model railway kits, specifically because I thought maybe a little bit of diversification from my usual sort of topics to topics that I don't normally find interesting that other people may well do. So with that in mind, I thought it might be quite a bit of fun to do stuff that we wouldn't normally do. So this is me scouring eBay and various other sources for kits that are no longer available and for small independent producers that aren't the mainstream. So here we go then with the first of something different. PECO Wonderful Wagon Kit, SAXA Salt. Having never done anything like this before, I was quite surprised to see what was inside the box. Printed artwork for the sides of the wagon, a cast shell for the base, and various parts that make up the top of the body. A couple of sprues with sundry parts, and then most surprising of all, an A4 sheet of instructions with several exploded diagrams. Like the ready-to-run manufacturers of old that produced wagons of a generic style and then applied many liveries to them to pump out different sort of wagons, this one for a kit is based on the same idea. It's a generic shape, an underframe with various different tops, inserts and sides. Clever and impressive. The parts on the sprues seem to be of a strange sort of plastic, almost rubbery, so I opted to use super glue to stick them to the metal parts and other bits and pieces, backed up where I could with some araldite or whatever it's called these days. Things were going really good, going really well. Alone in my corner, making little models. The curse of eBay struck once again. The damned missing parts. Oh, bloody hell. Salvation was delivered by Royal Mail in the form of these Bill Bedford RCH W-Irons supplied by Wizard Models. A bit of 240 grit emery cloth got them nice and shiny, ready for the bending tool, and then a little bit of heat to put some solder in the joint to make it quite solid. Now that we're back on track, well, sort of, I had to take the buffer beams off and clean the glue off, and then position these W-irons where the kit part should have gone, lining up with the bolts and stuff on the sole bar. I decided to get sprung W-irons in keeping with the kit because it comes with sprung wheel sets. Well, it would have been if those parts were in the kit. Positioning the sprung part of the W-iron over a small hole that I'd drilled in a piece of plywood, a brass bearing cup was dropped in the hole, and then a little bit of heat was applied and a blob of solder to weld the two parts together. Easing the finger parts on the top of the spring mechanism apart so that you could get the spring wiring, which sprung and landed God knows where because I ended up cutting 6 pieces for the 4 pieces I actually need. No doubt I'll find those pieces at some stage in the future when I'm wandering around the house with no socks and shoes on, and it will end up embedded in the bottom of my foot. Threading the wire through the little holes in the end is probably the hardest part of this whole process. The editing on this probably doesn't do this justice. I did spend a good 10 minutes or so cleaning up all the solder and making sure there were no burrs on any of the edges so that the springy part stayed springy and actually did work. The buffer beam needed slight modification and then it was refitted. The locating pins that protrude onto the inside of the wagon were then glued in place with a bit of araldite. Because this kit is designed to do multiple different things, the brake assembly comes with additional brake shoes that need to be chopped off for whichever kit this represents. SAXA Salt, probably the most well recognised version of all of the salt wagons. This iconic name was the brand name of the Middlewich Salt Company Limited, and a fleet of elderly open wagons and peaked roof vans were operated right up until the company decided to switch operations from rail to road in the mid-1960s. These wagons were predominantly made of wood, including most of the chassis. The only metal part seemed to be the bracing on the sides and the roof, and on the underframe, including the brake gear and wheels and running gear. And the majority of these wagons seem to have been built in the early 1900s. And you should know what's coming next. Revel number 9. And previously, if all masking was that quick and easy, I would really like doing it. With the roof and the underframe, about 3 coats of Revel number 9 to unify all the parts into a not black colour. The final part of construction, well, the main components anyway, is the top of the body and the peaked roof. Although probably not necessary, I glued these two pieces together with some contact adhesive. And as you can see, there's some quite large gaps in these two components. I'm not worried about this though, because the embossed card sides will cover all of that up. For this part, I put a fresh blade in the knife, because a dull blade will drag and snag on card and paper, and you won't get a clean cut. The ends were glued on first using contact adhesive, spread evenly on both surfaces to be stuck together, firstly on the wagon and then on the card sides. I left both sides for about a minute while the glue cured just a little bit before sticking the two halves together. Most important that we keep all of the edges glued down tightly. Finger pressure is enough to keep this all in check. Now it does say in the instructions to fold the sides over the ends to create the illusion of the corner strapping. Because we're working with embossed card, which is essentially multiple layers of compressed paper, and because we're going to be folding the sides over the ends, the card is really quite thick. So I thought with our sharp blade we can score halfway down the part that needs to be folded, and then see if we can get the blade in between the layers of paper and separate half of it off. This will enable us to get a sharper corner and for the end strapping to be not as thick, using the same method as before to get the sides glued on. It probably doesn't seem so on this video, but in real life these colours are really bright. So I'll see if we can tone them down in a little bit, as well as doing a little bit of experimental weathering. So with a really sharp pencil, I'm just going to go along all of the embossed lines and just lightly pencil in, creating a sort of fake shadow. And yes, I do watch Uncle Night Shift, although I haven't managed to acquire the Eastern European accent yet. And I was going to edit this bit out, but the pencil slipped and I thought, oh no, I can just rub it out, it's a pencil. The embossed paper is really nice, and it does afford us the opportunity to use the edge of the pencil to pick out all of the rivets, to make them more visible and to make the model look a bit more interesting. Before I go on to do the weathering powders, I'll just pick out the roof strapping in a metal colour, so after we've done the powders we can go with our finger and polish the strapping on the roof, give it a bit of a metallic sheen. We'll start the weathering powders off with a very light colour. Concrete is the only one that I've got that's sort of light, so hopefully this will tone down the pencil marks and also make the yellow appear a little bit faded. It's really difficult to see under this spot lamp, but in natural light this is really pronounced and you can see a marked difference. Switching our attention to the roof, I gave it a dusting of brick dust first off, and then to create some tonal variation I went back over it with some black. It doesn't take long to transform something that at first glance looks quite bland into something that looks quite interesting. And because the chassis is made primarily of wood, I steered clear of using the rust colours, preferring to use the concoction of different colours that have fallen onto my paper tissue. And then once the underframe had a general coating of that grimy mixture, I did get some rust colours just to run over the axle boxes and W-irons. The weathering powders were then sealed in with some pigment fixer that I misted through the airbrush. At some stage in the future I'll fit the adapter plates and some couplings, but for now it will be another shelf queen until I work out what I want to do with it. I've really enjoyed this build, even though it was mired in the middle by there being two quite significant pieces not being in the box. I've quite enjoyed the divergence into something different and a little bit obscure, and look forward to doing something similar in the future. Enjoyable as it was, this video must come to an end at some stage, which leaves me the only thing to say is thanks for watching, see you next time.